Chapter 1: The Invitation. The email arrived on a dreary Tuesday morning, its subject line glowing ominously in Maya's inbox. Weekend getaway at Ravencrest Manor. Are you brave enough? She recognized the sender immediately. Jackson Chen, her old college friend, known for his outlandish adventures and questionable decision-making. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, or perhaps more dangerous, considering the recent string of sleepless nights that had been plaguing their tight-knit group of friends. Found this absolute gem, Jackson's message read, accompanied by photos of a towering Victorian mansion with weathered stone walls and Gothic spires that seemed to pierce the cloud-laden sky. It's been abandoned for decades, but my uncle's real estate company just acquired it. We can have it all to ourselves this weekend. Sarah, Chris, and Alina are already in. What do you say, Maya? One last adventure before real life drowns us completely. Maya's cursor hovered over the response button as she studied the images more closely. Something about the mansion's facade sent a chill down her spine. The way the windows seemed to stare back at her like hollow eyes, the peculiar angle of the weather vane that pointed perpetually west, the darkness that lurked behind each glass pane. Yet it was the final photograph that truly caught her attention. A newspaper clipping from 1963 with the headline, "Tragic Death at Ravencrest Manor Leaves Community Questioning." Her fingers moved almost involuntarily across the keyboard as memories of their past explorations flooded back. Abandoned subway tunnels, forgotten warehouses, derelict amusement parks. But this felt different. The mansion seemed to hold secrets that were perhaps better left undisturbed. Still, the thought of reuniting with her old friends, of experiencing one more adventure together before their lives pulled them in different directions, proved too tempting to resist. "Count me in," she typed, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled slightly. "But Jackson, what's the story with that newspaper clipping? There's something you're not telling us, isn't there?" The response came almost immediately, as if Jackson had been waiting eagerly by his computer. "All part of the experience, Maya, dear. Pack warm clothes and bring your camera. You won't want to miss what happens after dark." As Maya closed her laptop, a gust of wind rattled her apartment windows, and for a brief moment she could have sworn she heard a distant, mocking laugh carried on the breeze. She shook her head, dismissing it as imagination, but deep down, she knew this weekend would be unlike anything they had experienced before. The real question was, would they all make it through to tell the tale? Chapter 2: The Arrival. The winding road to Ravencrest Manor seemed to grow narrower and more treacherous with each passing mile. Maya's grip tightened on her steering wheel as she followed Jackson's car through the thickening fog, the afternoon sun barely penetrating the dense canopy of ancient oaks overhead. Sarah sat beside her, unusually quiet, her usual stream of witty comments silenced by the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to grow heavier as they approached their destination. When they finally emerged from the woods, Ravencrest Manor loomed before them, even more imposing than the photos had suggested. The mansion stood 3 stories tall, its limestone walls stained with decades of neglect, while twisted ivy crawled up its facade like grasping fingers. The windows, some broken and others intact, reflected the dying sunlight in a way that made them appear to be watching the newcomers with suspicious interest. "Well, this is charming," Elena said as she stepped out of Jackson's car, her voice wavering slightly. Chris followed, camera already in hand, documenting their arrival. "Jackson, you really outdid yourself this time. This place looks like it's straight out of a horror movie." The words had barely left his mouth when a murder of crows erupted from one of the manor's broken windows, their harsh cries echoing across the overgrown grounds. As they gathered their bags from the cars, Maya noticed something odd about the front door, an intricate series of symbols carved into its ancient wood, partially hidden beneath peeling paint. Before she could point them out to the others, Jackson was already there, producing an old brass key with a flourish. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with his characteristic grin, "welcome to your home for the next 48 hours." The key turned with a sound like breaking bones, and the door swung open with a groan that seemed to resonate through the very foundation of the house. The entrance hall that greeted them was a testament to faded grandeur. A sweeping staircase dominated the space, its banister thick with dust, while a crystal chandelier hung precariously overhead, its crystals tinkling softly, though there wasn't a breath of wind. Sarah pulled out her phone, frowning at the screen. "No signal," she announced, her voice echoing slightly. "Of course there isn't," Chris replied, still filming. "What's a proper ghost story without complete isolation?" As they stood there taking in their surroundings, a sudden chill swept through the hall, causing the chandelier to sway ever so slightly. And then they all heard it, a sound that made their blood run cold. Somewhere above them, echoing through the empty corridors of Ravencrest Manor, came the distinct sound of footsteps, followed by what could only be described as angry, muffled shouting. For a moment, no one moved. Then Jackson, his face pale but his smile unchanged, whispered, "Looks like someone's already home." Chapter 3: First Encounters. The group ascended the grand staircase with cautious steps, their flashlight beams dancing across peeling wallpaper and dusty portraits. Elena clutched her EMF meter, which had started emitting a low, persistent hum the moment they'd entered the house. The angry shouting they'd heard earlier had ceased, but the silence that replaced it felt even more menacing. "According to the floor plans," Jackson whispered, consulting his phone's dimming screen, "there should be 6 bedrooms on this floor. We can pair up." He was cut short by a thunderous crash from the room at the end of the hall. Sarah grabbed Maya's arm so tightly it would surely leave bruises. Chris, to his credit, kept his camera steady, though his hands were visibly shaking. The door to the room stood slightly ajar, and as they watched, it slowly creaked open wider. Elena's EMF meter suddenly shrieked to life, its display flickering wildly. "Guys," she breathed, "I've never seen readings like this before." The temperature in the hallway plummeted so rapidly that they could see their breath materializing in front of them. Then they saw it. A figure materialized in the doorway, not the misty, translucent apparition they'd expected, but a solid-looking man in dated clothing, his face contorted with rage. His eyes burned with an unnatural blue light, and the air around him seemed to crackle with malevolent energy. "Get out!" The voice boomed through the corridor, rattling the windows and shaking dust from the ceiling. The portrait frames lining the walls began to rattle violently. Maya, who had been studying paranormal phenomena for years, stepped forward despite her friend's protests. "We're not here to disturb you," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We just want to understand what happened here." The ghost's expression flickered for a moment, something like surprise crossing its features before the rage returned. A burst of energy exploded from the figure, sending them all stumbling backward. "You know nothing," the spirit roared, and suddenly all the doors in the hallway began slamming open and shut in a cacophony of wooden thuds. "They betrayed me. They all betrayed me." Objects started flying through the air, books, vases, anything that wasn't bolted down. Chris ducked just in time to avoid a heavy brass candlestick that embedded itself in the wall behind him. Jackson, who had been frozen in place until now, suddenly grabbed Elena's arm and shouted, "Run!" They retreated down the stairs in a panicked rush, the entity's maniacal laughter following them. As they huddled in the entrance hall, trying to catch their breath, Maya noticed something clutched in her hand, a crumpled photograph that must have been caught in the whirlwind of flying objects. It showed a group of people standing in front of the mansion, dated 1963. But what caught her attention was the man standing slightly apart from the others, his face a mirror image of the spirit they'd just encountered. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Richard Blackwood's last summer at Ravencrest." Chapter 4: The Photograph. In the relative safety of the mansion's entrance hall, the group huddled around Maya as she carefully smoothed out the creased photograph. The sepia-toned image seemed to pulse with an energy of its own under the beam of their flashlights. Richard Blackwood's face stared back at them, a stark contrast to the spectral visage they'd encountered upstairs. Here he appeared young, handsome, but with an unmistakable sadness in his eyes. "Look at the others in the photo," Elena whispered, her finger tracing the outlines of the remaining figures. "They're all smiling, but not him. And why is he standing so far from everyone else?" The group in the photograph seemed to be celebrating something, champagne glasses raised, broad grins on their faces, while Richard stood apart, his expression now clearly revealing a mix of anger and betrayal. Jackson pulled out his phone. Its battery mysteriously drained to 20% despite being fully charged when they arrived. I'm going to try to research this Richard Blackwood, he said, fingers flying over the keyboard. If this was his last summer here, something must have happened. His voice trailed off as the search results began loading painfully slowly, the mansion's thick walls seemingly interfering with the signal. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet since their encounter upstairs, suddenly spoke up. Did you notice what he said? They all betrayed me. And look at how the others are clustered together in this photo, like they're sharing a secret. She shuddered as a cold draft swept through the entrance hall, causing the chandelier above to sway ever so slightly. Chris reviewed the footage on his camera, his face illuminated by the small screen. Guys, you need to see this, he said, his voice trembling. When I slow down the footage of the ghost's appearance, there's something else. The group gathered around as he played back the video. In the frame-by-frame playback just before Richard's ghost manifested, a shadowy figure could be seen pushing him from behind, another spectral presence they hadn't noticed in their panic. Maya's hands shook as she turned the photograph over again. Below the date and caption, barely visible in the corner, was a series of numbers that looked like a newspaper reference. We need to find out what happened in the summer of 1963, she declared, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. These people in the photo, they're the key to understanding why Richard's spirit is so angry. And I have a feeling that other ghost we just saw in the footage is connected to whatever happened here. A sudden gust of wind blew through the entrance hall, carrying with it the distinct sound of weeping from somewhere deep within the mansion. The chandelier's crystals tinkled ominously, and in the distance, they could hear the slow, deliberate creaking of floorboards, as if someone or something was making their way toward them. Chapter 5: The Library's Secret. The mansion's library was a cathedral of knowledge frozen in time, its towering shelves reaching up into shadows that their flashlights couldn't penetrate. Maya led the way, her trembling hands holding the mysterious photograph as Jackson followed close behind, his phone's weak signal finally connecting to the local newspaper's digital archives. The numbers on the back, Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the constant creaking of the old house. They match the format of the Ravencrest Herald's archival system. Her fingers traced the spines of the bound newspaper collections, decades of local history, preserved in leather and dust. As if responding to their presence, a gust of cold air swept through the room, causing several loose papers to dance in the darkness. Elena grabbed Chris's arm as the temperature dropped suddenly, their breath visible in the beam of the flashlights. The weeping they'd heard earlier seemed closer now, echoing through the library's vast space. Ravencrest Herald, August 15th, 1963. Tragic accident at Ravencrest Mansion. Local resident Richard Blackwood, 28, was found dead yesterday evening following what police are calling a tragic accident at Ravencrest Mansion. According to witnesses, Blackwood fell from the third-floor balcony during a summer gathering. Despite immediate medical attention, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The deceased was known for his recent disputes with several prominent local families over the ownership of valuable mining rights. Police say no foul play is suspected, though some guests report unusual circumstances surrounding the incident. Sarah's hands shook as she read the article aloud. No foul play suspected, she scoffed. The ghost we saw clearly suggests otherwise. And look at this part about the mining rights. That must be what meant about betrayal. Jackson's phone suddenly lit up with another search result. Guys, I found something else. There was a follow-up investigation that never made it to press. According to these courthouse records, Richard Blackwood had discovered evidence of fraud involving those same mining rights. He was planning to expose everyone at that summer party. The library door slammed shut with a thunderous bang, making them all jump. The temperature dropped even further, and the weeping sound transformed into something else, a low, angry growl that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Books began to slide off the shelves around them, their pages fluttering open as they fell. Chris's camera screen flickered to life on its own, replaying the footage from earlier. But this time, something was different. The shadowy figure pushing Richard was clearer, and they could make out a face they recognized from the photograph. That's Thomas Wellington, Elena gasped, pointing to one of the smiling figures in their sepia-toned clue. He was there that night. Both of them were there. Chapter 6. Voices from the Past. The revelation about Thomas Wellington sent shockwaves through the group. Chris fumbled with his equipment, setting up the EVP recorder, while Maya and Sarah hastily photographed the newspaper article. The library's atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive, with static electricity seeming to crackle in the air around them. If Wellington was involved in Blackwood's death, Jackson theorized, his voice tight with tension, then the mining rights dispute wasn't just about business, it was personal. He pulled out an old leather-bound diary they'd found earlier, its pages yellow with age. August 14th, 1963. Tomorrow, I present my findings at the gathering. They think I don't know what they've done, how they've manipulated the records. Wellington, Harrison, all of them. They'll have to face the truth. The documents are secure. Even if something happens to me, justice will prevail. I've hidden everything where only someone who knows the mansion's true history would think to look. Elena's EVP recorder suddenly crackled to life, capturing a series of whispers that grew increasingly distinct. The group huddled around the device, their faces illuminated by its red recording light. Third floor, behind the panel, they watched me fall. Wellington, Harrison conspired. The temperature in the room plunged further, and the ghost's presence became palpable. Books continued to fly off the shelves, but now they seemed to be forming a pattern. Sarah was the first to notice it. They were falling in a line, pointing toward the library's grand fireplace. "Look at this," Chris said, examining the ornate carvings around the fireplace. "These aren't just decorative, they're dates, important events in Ravencrest's history. And this one," he pointed to a particular carving that seemed newer than the others. August 15th, 1963, the day after Blackwood wrote that diary entry. Maya ran her fingers along the carving, feeling something give way beneath her touch. A small panel clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a dusty manila envelope, its seal unbroken after 6 decades. Before they could reach for it, a powerful gust of wind extinguished their flashlights, plunging the library into darkness. Heart racing, Maya strained her eyes to see in the pitch-black room. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a storm. She felt a sudden rush of cold air sweep past, carrying a voice that resonated with a mix of anger and despair. "You cannot hide from the truth? Everyone, stay close," Jackson's voice called out, the tremor evident as he instinctively reached for Maya's hand. They huddled together, straining to hear above the cacophony of crashing books and the growing roar of the wind. A faint light flickered back to life as Chris's camera screen illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows against the walls. "I can see something," he exclaimed, pointing the camera toward the fireplace. There, where the envelope lay, was a figure, an ethereal apparition of Richard Blackwood, his expression twisted in anguish. The air around him shimmered with an otherworldly glow as he gestured towards the hidden compartment. "Find the truth, before it's too late." With that, the light flickered again, and the figure began to fade, leaving the group in a thick, suffocating silence. Maya knew they couldn't leave without uncovering what lay within that envelope. "Let's get that envelope," she urged, feeling a surge of determination. With a newfound resolve, they inched toward the fireplace, ready to uncover the secrets that had haunted Ravencrest Manor for decades. Chapter 7. The Sealed Envelope. With trembling hands, Maya held the manila envelope while Jackson pointed his flashlight at it. The paper was brittle, yellowed with age, but the red wax seal remained unbroken. The group gathered closer, their breath visible in the frigid air of the library. "Should we open it?" Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the constant low humming that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Sarah nodded, her camera ready to document whatever they might find. The chandelier above them began to swing gently, casting dancing shadows across the walls. A deep, resonant voice echoed through the room. "The truth must be known." With careful movements, Maya broke the seal and extracted several documents. The first was a typed letter, its heading bearing the letterhead of the Ravencrest Mining Company. Confidential, August 14, 1963, to Board of Directors. From fraudulent activities and safety violations. I have uncovered evidence of systematic fraud within our organization. Mr. Wellington and Mr. Harrison have deliberately falsified safety reports for mine shaft number 7, leading to multiple unreported accidents. Furthermore, geological surveys indicating dangerous conditions have been suppressed. The attached documents prove that profits from these unsafe operations have been diverted through shell companies. I intend to present this evidence at tomorrow's board meeting. Should anything happen to me, this letter and supporting documentation will serve as testimony to their crimes. Chris's EVP recorder suddenly emitted a burst of static, followed by a series of clear, chilling words. They pushed me. Staircase. Made it look like an accident. Wellington, Harrison. Blood on their hands. Sarah's camera started malfunctioning, but not before capturing a distinct orb of light that seemed to coalesce into a human shape near the library entrance. The temperature dropped even further, and frost began forming on the windows. The newspaper article, Jackson said, his voice shaking. It said Blackwood fell down the main staircase the night before the board meeting. They ruled it an accident, but he trailed off as the implications became clear. The spectral form grew more defined, revealing the outline of a man in 1960s business attire. His face bore an expression of both anger and desperate urgency. Books began flying off the shelves again, this time forming words on the floor. Third floor safe. Maya's heart raced as she exchanged glances with her friends. We have to go up there, she said, determination solidifying in her voice. The safe could hold the evidence that Richard was talking about. Jackson nodded, his expression a mix of fear and resolve. If there's anything in that safe, it could prove that Richard was right. But we need to be careful. Whatever spirits are here are clearly agitated, and we don't know what we'll find. As they cautiously made their way back through the dark library, the ghostly figure of Richard began to fade, but his eyes remained fixed on them, urging them onward. Find the truth, he seemed to whisper, his voice echoing in the oppressive silence. They climbed the staircase, each step creaking ominously beneath their weight. The air grew colder, thick with tension and anticipation. As they reached the third-floor landing, they saw the door to a small study at the end of the hallway, its surface marred by age and neglect. Maya reached for the doorknob, but it felt icy against her skin. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, filled with dust and shadows, and in the far corner stood an old, imposing safe. Its metal surface was tarnished, but it appeared intact, as if waiting for someone to unlock its secrets. Here it is, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This must be it. As they gathered around the safe, Alina pulled out a flashlight and shone it on the dial. It looks like a combination lock. If Richard left any clues, they might be here. Just then, a loud bang echoed from behind them, and they turned to see the door slam shut with a force that rattled the walls. Panic set in, but Maya quickly steeled herself. We can't give up now. Let's figure out this combination. With the sounds of the past swirling around them and the growing presence of unseen forces, they began to search the room for any hint that could unlock the mysteries of Ravencrest Manor once and for all. Chapter 8. The Third Floor Safe. Temperature reading, 42 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping rapidly. The journey to the third floor felt like an eternity. Each step of the grand staircase creaked beneath their feet, the wood seeming to groan with decades of secrets. Jackson led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, while Sarah's camera continued to malfunction, occasionally capturing strange streaks of light that seemed to guide their path. The ethereal form of Richard Blackwood flickered at the top of the stairs, his spectral hand pointing down the darkened hallway. Hurry, the voice echoed, before they return. The third-floor study was a testament to faded grandeur. Heavy velvet curtains, now moth-eaten and dusty, framed windows that overlooked the overgrown gardens below. Elena's EMF meter was going haywire, its reading off the charts as they approached a large painting of the mansion in its prime. Look at this, Chris whispered, running his fingers along the frame's edge. The painting swung forward on hidden hinges, revealing the safe they'd been seeking. Its surface was covered in elaborate Art Deco patterns, the metal tarnished with age. Maya stepped forward, her hands shaking as she recalled the combination from the document they'd found earlier. 6/23/1963, she murmured, carefully turning the dial. Each number seemed to resonate through the room, accompanied by an otherworldly hum. The safe's mechanism sparked to life with a series of clicks. As the door swung open, a rush of stale air carried the scent of old paper and something metallic, something like blood. Inside lay a stack of documents, photographs, and a small leather-bound journal. But before they could reach for the contents, the temperature plummeted. Frost crystallized on the windows in intricate patterns, and the ghost's presence became overwhelmingly strong. The spirit of Richard Blackwood materialized more clearly than ever before, his face contorted with a mixture of relief and urgent warning. "They're coming," the spirit's voice boomed, rattling the windows. "Wellington's grandson, Harrison's son. They know you're here. The truth. Protect the truth." The lights flickered violently, and somewhere in the distance they heard the distinct sound of car doors slamming. Chris grabbed the safe's contents, stuffing everything into his backpack. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice tight with fear. "Now." Maya nodded, her heart racing as they turned to leave. But just as they stepped back into the hallway, the door to the study slammed shut behind them with a force that echoed like thunder. "Not again!" Sarah exclaimed, her panic rising as she rattled the doorknob. It won't budge. The air grew thick with tension, and Richard's spectral form hovered near them, urgency radiating from him. "The attic," he said, pointing toward the end of the hallway. "You must go to the attic! Find the truth before it's too late!" With no other choice, the group sprinted down the hallway, the chill in the air following them like a dark cloud. They reached a staircase leading up to the attic, the steps creaking ominously beneath their weight. Each step seemed to grow heavier, as if the house itself were trying to pull them back. As they reached the attic door, a deafening crash echoed from the third-floor study, making them jump. "Go!" Maya shouted, pushing the door open. The attic was dark and cluttered, filled with old furniture, boxes, and memories long forgotten. Jackson switched on his flashlight, illuminating dust motes that danced in the beam. "We need to find something that connects all of this," he said, scanning the room. "Look for anything that might relate to the mining company or the families involved." Elena's EMF meter began to beep erratically again, its readings spiking as they moved deeper into the attic. In the far corner, Maya noticed an old trunk partially hidden beneath a tattered sheet. "Over here," she called out, rushing toward it. They gathered around the trunk, and with a deep breath, Maya unlatched it. Inside, she found a collection of faded documents, newspaper clippings, and a few more photographs from the summer of 1963. One photograph in particular caught her eye, a group of people standing in front of a different mansion, one that looked eerily similar to Ravencrest. "Look at this," she said, holding it up. "These people, are they the same ones from the photograph we found earlier?" As they examined the photograph, the atmosphere in the attic shifted, growing heavier. The ghostly voice of Richard echoed again, filled with urgency. "You must expose them before they take you too." With the weight of the past closing in on them and the sound of footsteps echoing through the house, the group understood that they were running out of time. The truth was not just a relic of the past, it was a battle for their very lives. Escape from the third floor, warning. Multiple vehicles approaching the mansion gates. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night air, followed by the crunch of footsteps on gravel. Sarah's hands trembled as she shoved the last of the documents into Chris's backpack. The temperature in the room had dropped so low their breath came out in visible clouds. Richard Blackwood's spirit swirled around them frantically. "The servants' stairs." Behind the wallpaper in the corner. His voice was urgent, almost desperate. "They mustn't find you with those papers." Elena's EMF meter suddenly died, plunging them into an eerie silence broken only by the sound of the mansion's front door creaking open below. Heavy footsteps echoed through the halls, accompanied by the beam of flashlights sweeping the first floor. Jackson moved first, tearing at the wallpaper where Richard had indicated. Behind it, they found a narrow door, its hinges rusted with age. The wood groaned as they forced it open, revealing a tight spiral staircase descending into darkness. Maya's flashlight beam caught cobwebs and decades of dust. Quick, Chris whispered, ushering everyone through the door. Maya, you first with the light. Elena, then Sarah. The sound of voices drifted up from below, growing closer. Male voices, angry and determined. They're coming up the main stairs. Third floor sweep. Find those kids. The servants' staircase was narrow and treacherous. Rotting wood creaked beneath their feet as they descended in single file, holding their breath with each step. Jackson brought up the rear, carefully pulling the hidden door closed behind them, just as flashlight beams swept into the third-floor study. The temperature dropped even further as Richard's spirit passed through the wall beside them. Keep going, he urged. The stairs will take you to the kitchen. There's a door to the gardens through the pantry. Above them, they could hear furniture being overturned, angry voices demanding to know where the safe's contents had gone. Sarah stumbled on a broken step, barely catching herself before she could cry out. Chris steadied her with a firm grip on her arm, his face pale in the dim light. Shh! Maya hissed, straining to hear what was happening above. The tension was palpable as they crept lower, the voices becoming increasingly frantic. I don't care if it's just kids. They have what we need. Split up and search every room. With adrenaline coursing through their veins, they reached the bottom of the spiral staircase, stepping into the cramped, dimly lit kitchen. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and a single flickering bulb cast a ghostly glow over the faded linoleum floor. This way, Richard urged, pointing toward a pantry door on the opposite side of the kitchen. The group moved quickly, feeling the urgency of their situation press down on them. They could hear heavy footsteps above, a search party methodically sweeping the mansion. Chris opened the pantry door, revealing a dark, cluttered space filled with old cans and jars, their labels long faded. There! Jackson whispered, indicating a small, slightly ajar door at the back of the pantry. That must lead outside. Maya pushed past him, her heart pounding in her chest. Let's go! As they squeezed through the cramped doorway, the musty air of the pantry gave way to the cool night air of the gardens outside. They stepped into the overgrown garden, the moonlight illuminating their escape route. The sound of shouting echoed behind them, the voices drawing closer. Check the kitchen! They can't have gone far. Move! Maya urged, pulling Chris along as they dashed toward a cluster of bushes, hoping to blend in with the shadows. They crouched low, hearts racing, listening intently as the footsteps echoed from inside the mansion. Where are they? One of the searchers barked, frustration evident in his voice. From their hidden spot, the group could see a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness of the kitchen window. The silhouettes of two figures moved in and out of the light, their frantic search a grim reminder of how close they were to being caught. We need to get to the fence, Sarah whispered, glancing at the high wooden barrier that separated the mansion from the woods beyond. There! Elena pointed to a gap in the fence, partially obscured by vines and overgrowth. If we can reach that, we might just make it. Just then, the sound of car engines revving outside filled the air, and they could hear the ominous approach of vehicles on the gravel driveway. The group exchanged frantic glances, knowing time was running out. We can't wait, Jackson said, determination replacing his earlier fear. On the count of 3, we run for the gap. Ready? 1, 2, 3. They bolted from their hiding spot, racing toward the fence. Heart pounding in her ears, Maya led the charge, the sound of footsteps behind them growing louder. Just as they reached the gap, a voice called out from the kitchen. There they are. Maya dove through the opening, followed closely by the others. The group tumbled into the underbrush on the other side, frantically pushing themselves up and into the safety of the trees. Breathless and wide-eyed, they sprinted into the dark woods, the sounds of the mansion fading behind them. But the warning of Richard's spirit echoed in their minds. They had to uncover the truth before it was too late. Through the garden's shadow. The kitchen door creaked open into a world of silver moonlight and dancing shadows. The overgrown Victorian garden stretched before them like a maze of twisted shapes, the once manicured hedges now wild and menacing in the darkness. Maya's flashlight beam caught the glint of dew on thorny roses that had claimed the nearest trellis. Richard's spectral form materialized beside them, his expression urgent. The groundskeeper's path runs along the eastern wall, he whispered, his voice carried on the night wind. Follow it to the old gate. They won't think to look there. They crouched low, moving between shadow and moonlight. Above them, flashlight beams swept across the mansion's windows. Sarah clutched the backpack containing the damning documents to her chest, her heart pounding with each snap of a twig beneath their feet. Check the grounds. They have to be here somewhere. Jackson led them through the tangled garden, following Richard's guidance. The ghost's presence seemed to dim the closer they got to the property's edge, his form flickering like a candle in the wind. Alina's EMF meter, newly revived, spun wildly before settling into a steady pulse. The boundary, Richard's voice came as barely more than a whisper. My influence ends here. But there's something else you should know about what happened that night. His form began to fade, the edges of his spectral body dissolving into the mist. The accident wasn't an accident at all. Margaret, Richard's voice faltered as distant shouts echoed across the garden. Find her diary in the town library's historical collection. The truth must be known. Chris pulled at the rusted gate, its hinges protesting with a screech that seemed to pierce the night. They held their breath, waiting for the sound of running feet, but the pursuing voices remained distant, focused on the main gardens. As they slipped through the gate, one by one, Sarah looked back at the mansion. For a moment, she thought she saw Richard's face in an upper window, his expression both sorrowful and determined. Then, Maya tugged at her arm, and they were running through the woods, leaving the Blackwood mansion and its secrets behind them. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. Richard's final words echoed in her mind, adding another layer to the mystery they'd stumbled into. Whatever truth lay hidden in Margaret's diary, it was clear the past wasn't done with them yet. As they navigated through the underbrush, the moonlight guiding their way, the chill of the night seeped into their bones. They moved quickly, driven by a mix of fear and determination. The branches clawed at them as they brushed past, and the sounds of the mansion faded into the distance, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the distant call of night creatures. We need to regroup and figure out our next move, Jackson panted, glancing around to make sure they were all together. We can't just run blindly. We need to plan. What about Richard's diary? Elena said, trying to catch her breath. If it's at the library, we should head there next. But how do we even know where to start looking? Chris asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. The library is huge, and we don't have a lot of time. Maya, still clutching the backpack tightly, nodded toward a nearby trail. If we head to town, I can use my phone to look up the library's catalog. Maybe we can find out if the diary has been archived or if we need to speak to someone directly. And what if they're watching us? Sarah interjected, anxiety creeping into her tone. What if they know we're onto them? They're probably still combing the mansion for us, Jackson replied, trying to sound reassuring. We have some time before they realize we've escaped. With a plan forming, they moved quickly and quietly through the dark woods, the tension palpable among them. The moon hung high, a silent witness to their desperate flight. As they approached the edge of the forest, the faint glow of streetlights began to peek through the trees, illuminating their path toward the town. They emerged into a clearing where the dimly lit road led them toward the promise of answers. The town was quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of a late-night diner and the occasional bark of a dog. As they walked, a mixture of excitement and dread filled the air. They were about to dive deeper into a mystery that had already claimed lives. This diary might hold the key to everything, Maya said, her determination renewed. If we can find it and figure out what Margaret knew, we might finally uncover the truth about Richard's death. The group nodded in agreement, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. But as they walked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows were watching them, waiting for the moment to strike again. They had uncovered secrets, but they were far from safe. Let's hurry, Chris urged, glancing over his shoulder. I don't want to be caught out in the open. And with that, they pressed onward, the shadows of the past trailing closely behind. Margaret's diary, July 15th, 1892. The weight of this secret threatens to crush my very soul. Richard suspects nothing, But how long can I maintain this facade? The accident in the laboratory wasn't what everyone believes. I saw what truly happened that night, and the guilt of my silence grows heavier with each passing day. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully turned the brittle pages. The town library's historical collection had yielded its treasure, but the revelations within were more disturbing than they could have imagined. I watched from the garden as Dr. Winchester tampered with Richard's equipment. He thought himself unseen in the dead of night, but the moon was bright and I was unable to sleep. The next morning, when the explosion occurred, I knew. I knew, and I said nothing. Richard's death weighs heavily upon my conscience. Dr. Winchester's triumph in acquiring the patents to my husband's inventions makes me sick with rage. Yet what proof do I have beyond my word? Who would believe a widow's testimony against such a respected member of society? Elena's EMF meter, sitting on the library table, suddenly spiked. The temperature around them dropped noticeably. I've hidden the true plans, Richard's final work, where no one will think to look. The key lies in understanding the pattern of the garden maze. Richard always said our love of mathematics would be our secret language. The coordinates are there for those who know how to read them. The garden maze, Chris whispered. That's why Richard's ghost led us there. He's been trying to reveal the truth all along. If you're reading this, and you've come this far, know that the truth must be revealed. The Winchester family's fortune is built on betrayal and murder. Richard's work could have changed the world, but instead, it lies waiting, protected by the very patterns that brought us together. As Sarah finished reading, a heavy silence enveloped the group. The implications of Margaret's words hung in the air like a storm cloud, darkening their thoughts. Dr. Winchester, Maya murmured, her brow furrowing. He's connected to the Winchesters we heard about earlier, the ones Richard was fighting against. This changes everything, Jackson said, pacing the small library room. If Dr. Winchester caused Richard's death and then stole his work, it's not just about revenge, it's about protecting that legacy. The mansion's secrets are tied to the very foundation of this town. We need to find that garden maze, Elena asserted, her EMF meter still flickering sporadically. If the key lies there, then Richard's final work might still be hidden, and it sounds like it's something worth exposing. But how do we even start? Chris questioned, the weight of their task sinking in. We don't even know where to look in that maze. The patterns! Sarah exclaimed, her eyes widening. Margaret mentioned them in her diary. There has to be something about the layout or the design of the maze that relates to Richard's work. Elena nodded, her voice gaining strength. We should go back to the mansion. The maze is probably overgrown, but if Richard created it as a protective measure, we might find clues hidden within. As they deliberated, the lights in the library flickered again, and a chill filled the room, as if Richard himself were urging them onward. Let's gather the documents and head back, Jackson said decisively. We can't let the truth die with us. They quickly gathered the diary and the other papers, stuffing them into Chris's backpack. As they moved toward the door, Sarah felt a surge of determination. The truth they sought was tangled in history, betrayal, and perhaps even danger, but they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The night air greeted them with a biting chill as they stepped outside, the moon casting long shadows over the path leading back to the mansion. Each step felt heavy with purpose. They were not just uncovering a family secret, but seeking justice for a man whose life had been stolen too soon. As they approached the mansion, its silhouette loomed ominously against the night sky. The garden maze awaited them, a labyrinth of secrets, where they hoped to unlock the truth hidden within its overgrown hedges. Stay close, Maya whispered, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as they entered the grounds once more. Richard is counting on us. And with that, they plunged in the depths of the garden, their hearts racing as they navigated the path that would lead them to the secrets of the past, and perhaps to their own salvation. The maze of truth. Navigating the overgrown garden, the group felt a palpable tension in the air, as if the very ground held its breath. The moonlight filtered through the tangled branches, illuminating their path, while shadows danced like specters of the past. Remember, Maya said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides, We're looking for patterns, anything that stands out. Elena held up her EMF meter, which had begun to pulse softly, guiding them deeper into the maze. The cold air thickened around them, a reminder of Richard's lingering presence. They reached the heart of the maze, where the hedges opened up into a small clearing. In the center stood a stone pedestal, covered in moss and vines. The pedestal bore the faint markings of mathematical symbols, patterns Richard had once described to Margaret. "This must be it," Chris breathed, kneeling to examine the symbols. If Richard used these as coordinates, they could lead us to his final work. As they began to decipher the symbols, the atmosphere shifted. Richard's ghost materialized beside them, his expression more serene than before. "You're close," he urged, his voice echoing in the stillness. "The truth is here, protected by what you see." With newfound determination, they worked together, tracing the symbols with their fingers. As they did, the ground beneath the pedestal began to tremble, and a hidden compartment opened at its base, revealing a small, weathered box. "This is it," Sarah exclaimed, reaching for the box. As she opened it, a stack of documents and blueprints spilled out, yellowed with age but intact. The air around them crackled with energy as they realized the significance of their find. "These are Richard's inventions," Maya said, eyes wide with disbelief. "He could have revolutionized mining safety, if only he'd lived to share this." But their celebration was short-lived. Distant voices echoed through the maze, growing louder as the figures of Wellington's grandson and Harrison's son approached, intent on reclaiming what they believed was rightfully theirs. "We have to go," Jackson urged, gathering the documents and stuffing them into the backpack. "They'll stop at nothing to silence us." As they retraced their steps through the maze, Richard's ghost guided them, his form flickering as they reached the edge of the garden. "You must expose the truth," he insisted, his voice growing faint. "Do not let my death be in vain." Emerging from the maze, they raced toward the mansion's entrance, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. The adrenaline surged as they burst into the main hall, where the confrontation lay ahead. "Stop them!" one of the men shouted, a mix of anger and fear in his voice. Maya stepped forward, clutching the documents tightly. "You can't silence us anymore. Richard's legacy will be known, and the truth about your families will come to light." The men faltered, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. In that moment, the tension in the air shifted as if the house itself had sided with the truth. The flickering lights stabilized, and a chill swept through the room as Richard's ghost appeared behind the group, radiant and powerful. "Leave," he commanded, his voice resonating with authority. "You can't erase the past." With their resolve shaken, the men retreated, fear written on their faces as they realized the power of the truth they had underestimated. Once they were gone, the group stood together, hearts racing. They had faced the darkness of the past and emerged victorious, carrying with them not only Richard's legacy, but also the knowledge that justice could prevail. "We need to take this to the authorities," Elena said, her voice filled with determination. "The world needs to know what really happened." As they left the mansion, the weight of history shifted. The moon hung high, a silent witness to their journey and the truths they would reveal. Richard's spirit lingered, a comforting presence as they made their way back to town, ready to bring light to the shadows that had long concealed the secrets of Ravencrest. "This isn't just about Richard anymore," Sarah reflected, looking back at the looming silhouette of the mansion. "It's about all the lives that were affected by these betrayals." With each step, they forged a path toward a future shaped by the truth, a legacy of hope, courage, and unwavering friendship. As they turned the corner toward the main road, Richard's ghost faded into the night, finally at peace, knowing that his story would not be forgotten. And so, the tale of the Blackwood Mansion came to a close, but its echoes would reverberate through the annals of history, a testament to the power of truth and the unbreakable bonds of friendship forged in the face of darkness. Final resolution. As the group reached the town, the sun began to rise, casting a golden light on the horizon. They gathered at the library to prepare the documents for the authorities. Maya opened the box one last time, and the blueprints spilled out, a legacy waiting to be shared with the world. "We have to document everything," Chris said, taking pictures of the inventions. "This is more than just Richard's work. It's a chance to change the future. As they worked, the town's historical society began to show interest, and soon, the story of Richard Blackwood began to spread. Articles were written, and the truth about the Winchester family's involvement in the tragedy came to light. In the months that followed, Richard's inventions inspired a movement for safer mining practices, and the community rallied together to honor his memory. A memorial was erected in the town square, celebrating Richard's contributions and the courage of those who fought to reveal the truth. The group, forever changed by their experiences, found new paths in their lives. Maya pursued engineering, inspired by Richard's work, while Sarah became an advocate for truth and justice, sharing stories of unsung heroes like Richard. Years later, as they stood together in the town square during the unveiling of the memorial, they felt Richard's presence once more, a gentle breeze that seemed to whisper gratitude. "We did it," Elena said, her voice thick with emotion. "We honored him." "And we will continue to fight for truth," Maya added, determination shining in her eyes, "for all those who can't speak for themselves." In that moment, surrounded by friends and the legacy they had helped to uncover, they understood that the bonds they forged in the face of darkness had created a light that would guide them and the town of Ravencrest for generations to come. And so, the tale of the Blackwood Mansion transformed into a story of resilience, courage, and the everlasting pursuit of truth, reminding everyone that even in the darkest corners, hope and friendship could shine brightly. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and help grow the channel. Your support means a lot and helps us keep bringing you more content.